and welcome to Superintendents Roundtable. I'm Deb Vinsel, the CEO here at Thurston Community Media. And to say that we're in a unique situation is definitely an understatement. As you all know, in March, our schools were closed to in-person instruction and everything moved online as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, our schools and school districts and administration and teachers have been working very hard to get ready for the new school year. And I am pleased to have with us again today the superintendents from our 4 largest school districts to talk about what's coming up and how things are going to be a little bit different. So I want to welcome to the roundtable, to the virtual roundtable, Brian Horton from the Yelm Community Schools and Deborah Clemens from the North Thurston Public Schools, Patrick Murphy from the Olympia School District, and Sean Dotson from the Tumwater City Schools. So welcome all, and thank you for taking some time from what I know are very busy schedules this year.
Thank you.
So let's just kind of rewind a little bit. March 13th or 14th, whatever it was.
It was Friday the 13th.
It was Friday the 13th. Thanks for the clarification. It hit us all very quickly and somewhat unexpectedly, and things were thrown into, well, chaos, I guess is the word to use. And I know at that time, teachers and administrators and parents and students and everybody else had to shift very quickly to a new way of providing education for students. So you and your staff have had 5 months now to think about this and to work on this and to train for this. So I'm just going to start with, how is it going to be different when parents come back to school? And before we start that, to recognize that our districts are starting at slightly different schedules. Yelm schools are starting on September 2nd. Everybody else is starting September 9th. So how is it going to be different from what families experienced in March with the online learning environment? So Brian, you get to go first since you're going first.
Well, thank you. I want to just start off by acknowledging how proud I am of our staff and what they did from March 13th to the end of the school year. To just say from one day, I think the message was, you're going to be shut down for 2 weeks or something along that line. And to have to, on the spur of the moment, finish the year in an online environment, and then get the message on top of that we were to extend learning. I think our district gave an incredible high integrity effort to teach to high standards, teach to the standards we would have normally tried to get students to. We worked really hard with families to get connected, serve food, get technology. So as tough as it was, I'm really proud of where we're at. But to answer your question specifically, I'm even more proud of where we've come. We've spent the summer, our teachers engaged in multiple levels of training in technology tools and in philosophy of how to create an online classroom. And then lastly, in how to collaborate across a district and schools in an online format. And I think we're ready. And I don't think what our parents will see this fall will be recognizable back to March. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited for that. Wish we had the kids on campus, but I'm happy with the growth. And that's one thing that we know about educators is that you put a challenge in front of them, they'll step up to it.
Okay. Deborah, how about you in the North Thurston district?
I agree with what Brian shared about last spring. I was really impressed with how our teachers just had everything changed, but still tried to really finish the school year strong. We centralized a lot of our support for our teachers, especially our elementary teachers. We identified the critical standards and designed units of instruction that our teachers could then focus on the delivery of instruction and not planning all of the lessons. What I see different going into this fall, of course, our teachers know a lot more about teaching in a remote environment. Not only have they learned more about the tools that are available, they also are learning how to take what they would do in a normal classroom environment and offer it remotely. Just yesterday, we had a full day of professional learning, and I had the opportunity to sit in on one of the sessions led by one of our early learning specialists. So she was focused on helping our preschool and kindergarten teachers learn how to keep children's attention in a remote environment and giving them some tools and suggestions for how to do it. As well as, I think one thing that's going to be very different this fall is in the spring, when we closed school, our teachers already had established strong relationships with the children that they were serving in their classrooms. And so starting the school year out, our first focus is really developing those relationships between the teacher and the students and between the teacher and the families. One thing that we heard last spring was from our parents of how much more engaged they were in what their children were learning in school. And we don't want to lose that, even though we know it's going to be a remote environment and it will certainly require more parent participation. That's, I think, one of the things that's come out of this pandemic and out of remote learning is that stronger connection with family. So we have set schedules for fall. So the other change, I'll just wrap up and give my colleagues time to share, but the other change is more synchronous learning. So we'll have more real-time instruction. We will still have resources that students will access during their independent learning time, but with the schedule that we have planned for this fall, there will be more synchronous instruction happening.
Okay. Patrick, how about you and Olympia?
Thanks, Deb. I'd like to echo again some of the things that my colleagues said, that what was asked of our community and of our staff in the spring was unprecedented. Trying to completely shift the paradigm overnight and go from a model that's worked very well to something that's completely different was a huge monumental task to overcome. And I think in all of that, one of the things that we've been saying as a school district is that there has to be a meaning for all of this and that we're going to come out of this better. This whole idea of not going back to normal, we've been really strong about saying that, oh, I can't wait to get back to normal. Mm-hmm. We're not going back to normal. We're going to go back to better. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that was interesting when I came to the Olympia School District over 3 years ago is I talked about in my previous district about an online learning academy that we had there. And I really wanted to press this idea of online learning. There's states like Idaho and Florida that you are required to take an online class in order to graduate from high school, because it is the way that we are going to be trained, that we're going to be doing college level classes, that we're going to be doing all sorts of work moving forward. We're already doing it. We have kids that are in school. They learned long before the pandemic. They were doing blended classes and lots of things that way. And yet school districts historically have sometimes been really slow to change for good reasons. It's the whole, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So the overwhelming majority of the people, especially in our 4 school districts, have had really great experiences in our school districts, but not everybody. We've all fought those nagging disproportionalities within our districts that have kind of forced us to think about how we might do things differently. I believe this pandemic has forced us to do that we are actually having conversations like Deb was saying, that we're going to have to be stronger at certain aspects, forming relationships with kids, meeting the individualized needs of families, realizing front and center how poverty impacts a student's ability to learn in school. All of these things we have been forced to learn during this time, which has caused all sorts of turmoil and stress, is going to make us better when we come out of this. So that is the optimism that I bring to this in the midst of all of the frustration and the changing Department of Health guidance and OSPI and everything else. We're going to be better. I guess I'll just add that the training that we're doing is very similar to what Brian and Deb shared. We're going to get better at the whole high leverage practices of online learning. Some things are transferable to an online classroom from in person, but some are not. You need to think about things differently. You don't just replicate your 6.5-hour school day online. There needs to be synchronous and asynchronous components. So we're doing part of that training. To Deb's point, also the whole idea of relationships, social emotional learning, huge trauma has occurred in our community, in our nation, in our world. People have suffered actually from COVID-19, unemployment, depression, anxiety, all sorts of things are up. We need to focus on social emotional, whole child components before we can do anything academically. And so we're training up our staff on that. And then lastly, I don't think this was a coincidence either, that when the pandemic hit, George Floyd was killed, and we had this huge awakening around racial equity in this country. And so we're having all of these conversations about, again, this disproportionality in our system. students of color and how they've historically not reached the level that we or they or their families want them to be in our system as a whole. And so we're having a lot of training around racial equity and identity and systemic racism and barriers within our system. So I believe, like I said, all of these things that we're doing, we should always be doing, and we're going to come out of this better because of it.
Good. Sean, what's going on in Tumwater?
Well, you'll hear some echoed themes. I think what our teachers were doing this spring, I heard best described as emergency remote teaching. We were thrown into this in a very short time. And I go back to when I student taught and how much I was learning at that point every day, how much every lesson was an absolute new experience. And our teachers all got thrown back into student teaching this spring. And what's great about that is then after that, now we've had a summer for them to reflect on that experience and take all of their, and we have some experienced, amazing people in our classrooms. And they've been coming back saying, okay, I have ideas now. I know what I can do with that information. And they're out getting training as well. As you've heard in the other places, we're using something called the Distance Learning Playbook, which is really just a structure for helping our teachers learn best practices for remote instruction. How do you do direct instruction? How do you help peers learn from each other? How do you help them engage in independent work? And how do you address those complex equity issues that Patrick was just talking about so that they can be really effective for students? So that's a big deal. Plus, when everyone got thrown into this, we were also learning simple things at that time, like how do you use Zoom to run a synchronous session? I mean, that's where we were at that stage. I remember as we were teaching people, how do you use Zoom? How do you use Google Meets? What is a learning management system? And so now our teachers are using those learning management systems much more effectively and have had time for training on that over the summer. And working with, and we also recognize some of the things that created challenges for us in the spring. We know we need to provide more support for our parents and how do they help their students in remote learning. That's an absolute necessity in this. So we've been talking about what supports do we put in place to help our parents out? How do we get out to our kids who are on the wrong side of the digital divide right now? Because that was a huge challenge in the summer. I remember how much time we spent just trying to get connected with our families and say, how do we help you access learning? And we're now talking about how do we bring students into our school in small groups, perhaps to assist with that. We have better resources to give parents, to get more people connected to internet. We're looking at trying to, with our schedule, you heard from others that there's more of a schedule this year that's a normal school day type schedule with synchronous learning, asynchronous learning, and some independent activities. We recognize our kids need a structure and routine. We also recognize our families in this situation need flexibility because some of our families, the parents are working, and when they could access learning might not be during the normal school hours to support their children. So we're trying to think about all of those things in the structure and in the way we organize learning. And I think it's going to make it a completely different experience. Brian said it, this will not look like what it did in the spring, but it's because of the opportunity we had in the spring to experience online learning, walk away, reflect on it, and get better.
So one of the questions that came up just in a conversation recently with a friend of mine, and it talks about the daily schedule, because you've all mentioned synchronous and asynchronous and independent learning. Elementary school is one thing. Kids are in a classroom, they have the same teacher and teacher's aide pretty much all day long, and that teacher teaches multiple subjects. Middle school and high school are a different environment where kids move from class to class, different teachers for different subjects. So how are those being handled? I mean, how is that working in the online environment with the different grade levels? Deborah, I'll start with you.
So at the middle and high school level, our students will be enrolled in 6 classes. They will be focused on direct instruction or synchronous instruction for only 3 classes per day. So one thing that we know is that spending all day in front of a computer is not necessarily best either. So we're prioritizing periods 1, 2, 3 on Monday, periods 4, 5, 6 on Tuesday, and then the same thing Wednesday and Thursday. Within the direct instruction time, on a given day, a student may be also assigned to a small group for instruction outside of the regular classroom instruction at the middle and high school level. And that could happen Monday through Thursday and then also on Fridays. So that's what's different for middle school and high school students, is that they will still have responsibility for 6 classes, but in terms of when they have synchronous instruction, they'll have 3 classes on a given day.
Gotcha.
For elementary students, they will also have focused instructional times, but they will also have some breaks during a scheduled instructional time.
Okay. So that's from the student's perspective. What about from the teacher's perspective? So the English teacher is teaching freshman English 3 hours in a row, or how is that working?
So if I'm a classroom teacher, my workday will begin and end around the same amount of time. If I'm a secondary teacher, I'm going to begin my day with my advisory students. So we will be doing that kind of check-in every day. As was mentioned, we're putting the social emotional learning, the relationship building front and center. So for all of our teachers at the elementary level, every day begins with a social emotional learning lesson, and at the secondary level, it would be an advisory program. And that's not only for social emotional learning, also for their high school and beyond planning, for other clubs meeting, things like that are part of that middle school, high school experience. So the Teacher's Day will start at the same time and end around the same time. Teachers do have in a remote teaching environment flexibility that they can choose to do, but expectations are that they would work a normal school day schedule.
Okay. Patrick, how's it working in Olympia?
Well, again, a lot of similarities I think we're going to find across school districts. I think one thing to key on, and I think we talked about this at the beginning, is again, by moving to a completely remote learning model, although we're all talking about small groups of students that maybe have pretty profound special needs, that we are allowed by Thurston County Department of Health guidelines to serve some of them in our building if we can meet all the safety protocols. But the overwhelming majority of our students will be served remotely online to start the school year until some of the transmission rates and things change, which I think we'll talk about later. Mm-hmm. But again, because they're remote, what we lose is the great equalizer of the schoolhouse, of the classroom, right? So no matter what's happening outside of school, we can bring you in here and we'll make sure you have the supplies you need, everything you need, a classroom, the heat, the water, everything you need to go. So we can't forget that hasn't changed. The fact that our students are remotely is we have not been able to level that playing field. In fact, with some of the economic stuff that's happening out there, it might have gotten worse for some families since the spring. And so we really need to be thoughtful about how we're doing, how we're loading work onto students and families. And so one of the things that OSPI said at the outset was narrow your focus. Really work with your teachers on those key standards, right? You might have all of this breadth normally in a brick and mortar setting. What are those key things you want to work on? So again, I believe across all of our districts, our teachers have worked to identify those key essential standards. So that's one thing to help our teachers as they're going into this work. Similar to what Deb said, we are also doing 3 periods per day at the secondary level and middle and high school, again, to kind of give less per day for students to concentrate on, to kind of make it a little bit easier on them. We also, we didn't really talk about this, but in June, one of the announcements that came out of OSPI in June was, we expect you all to be going back to school in September. I don't know if you remember that, but there was an expectation that said, you're all going back to school in September.
Right.
Well, here we are, and we're not all going back to school in September. But while we were planning to go back to school in September and meet all of the CDC guidelines around physical distancing, masks, and everything else, we weren't going to be able to go back to school, everybody at the same time. We were talking about hybrid schedules, where half the students would come at a time. Mm-hmm. Our schedules are made up remotely to be similar to that hybrid schedule, so that when we go to hybrid, when those rates go down, we'll transition again to 3 periods per day, like Deb was describing, but you'll be in person every other day doing those things. We also have in our schedule on Wednesday is more of a office hours, small group work, advisory, social, emotional support, with the main academic direct instruction happening on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. In our elementary schools, it's Monday through Friday. The teachers are working with them. There's check-ins, sort of I wasn't an elementary teacher, but they sit in the carpet squares and they have their class meeting at the beginning of the day. And they all talk about it. We're going to be doing that every day to make sure that they're doing okay as a whole child. And then we're focusing on key content each day, like English language arts on a Monday and mathematics on a Wednesday, and science on a Friday. So really, again, trying to consolidate to not overwhelm students because they're not in our schools with us, to just give them digestible things that they can do, for lack of a better word, that makes it a little bit easier on them and mom and dad who are trying to support them home.
Okay. Sean, how do you want to add?
Sure. I think similar to what you've heard, our schedule is a 3-period day over 2 days. Students at the secondary level would have all 6 periods. It's going to be this mix of synchronous content where students and really synchronous content is around connection, collaboration, answering questions, interaction, that's meeting those needs of our students to feel connected to a classroom and connected with each other. New content is primarily probably going to be delivered over asynchronous, recorded videos and other ways, because that way those students who can't be there at that time have a way to access all of that learning anytime they want. They can stop, they can rewind, they can relook at information and make sure they really get that support. But we don't want our kids, you've heard this, we don't want our kids plugged into a screen all day. That's not ideal. And while that will be our way of connecting with our students, getting them away from the screen and involved in hands-on activities and other things, that's going to be, that's good too. So PE class, we talk about how do we get kids to go out and get active? How do we make the opportunity to have kids in a good schedule of independent reading on a regular basis, where what I know as an English teacher is that reading is what gets you better at that, the practice and the support. So teaching good habits will be a big part of what we do. And then you've heard from others already that social emotional learning will be so important. We're taking time to train our staff on how do we support student wellness, because in this environment, our kids' lives have been disrupted in pretty meaningful ways. And so helping them with that, small groups that we can bring together to support issues of equity and making sure that all of our students have the opportunity to succeed in this environment. And we know what we start in September, we'll keep learning. I mentioned we were in student teaching this spring. So I was much better as a first-year teacher than I was during student teaching, but I also know 3 weeks into my first year of teaching, I started shifting things because I learned more, and we know we're going to keep learning more and we're going to keep getting better. And so we will get started and we will keep getting better at this and offering additional supports and ways to make sure our kids are getting a quality experience through this schedule.
And Brian, Yelm Schools.
Yeah, I'll try to avoid the redundancies, but there are 2 things that our parents said that they really wanted and needed from us transitioning from spring to fall. And the first was consistency, and the second was accountability. How do they provide that level of accountability for their kids in the online environment? So first and foremost is when we're online, we can shift the start of the school day district-wide to the same time. And so we'll start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and everybody starts at 8 o'clock, which is later for the secondary kids and about the same time for the elementary kids as before. What's good about that at the elementary level is we will start with class meetings, and there will be a district-wide elementary SEL, social emotional learning lesson that is being taught. It won't be taught the same way. It's not the same strategy, but it's the same standard. And so there'll be lots of consistency that way. And then we chunked out the day so that we have combinations of live and recorded opportunities for kids. Heavy emphasis on reading and math, making sure that instruction is really strong and built in time for social studies and science at the elementary. We built in recess. That's a great thing, because even if it's just run around the couch or run around the yard or something along those lines, we've got to get kids up and moving, and that's a real strong challenge for our specialist teachers. The other part I want to talk a little bit about. Let me go to the secondary first. We'll do a 3-period day, and we'll have the SEL portion after the first period of the day. So we'll go periods 1, 2, and 3, but there'll be an advisory time there after the first period of the day. And then our Wednesdays will be content-specific, office hours, tutorial, get work done, get caught up. If anything went wrong, you lost your internet for a couple of days, that Wednesday is really there to help kids get caught up. But the accountability side, I think, is really exciting, because I think Patrick said, if we can come back, let's come back better. And so attendance is one of those pieces. So we'll take attendance live, but if something goes wrong in a family, they have to change their schedule for a day, their childcare gets shut down. We can also take attendance based on the work that the kids turn in the week. So, and that's really been invigorating for parents, because if they're struggling to get a consistent schedule at home, but they know they can provide it at a different time, we'll be there to support them. Another really exciting practice that our teachers brought forward was there's always been this 60 minutes called WAC time after what is traditionally the student day. And our teachers brought us a proposal that said, for 2 days of the week, can we flex that and offer office hours in the evening to families? And so we went, okay, sure, please go right ahead. That's a wonderful suggestion. And it came out of listening to what our parents said they wanted. We know we're putting them in a terrible bind. This whole situation is, but we're trying to figure out ways that we can create, for those who need it, a very typical looking school day, and those that need flexibility, we want to be there to respond.
Okay. So,
Deb, can
yeah,
I
go
ask
ahead, Patrick.
As I listen to my colleagues share stuff, this whole idea of getting back to better, I think that some of these practices that we're talking about will be good when the pandemic is gone.
Right.
So again, this idea that that a student misses class, so we want to have a recording of that direct instruction just in case they weren't there. Wouldn't that have been great 3 years ago? I mean, instead of a kid coming in sick saying, what did I miss?
Right.
And what would happen is the kid would be sick at home and not be feeling well. And they'd say, I can't afford to miss school today because I'm not going to hear it if the teacher's not there. I got to go to school sick. And we would say, what are we saying now? Stay home if you're sick. Do not. So we're going to change what we do to encourage people not to come to school sick, that we'll have these things available to you. Teachers being available in the evening, if there's a smart, efficient way to do that. I mean, to get around people's schedules, different ways to take attendance, turn in the work counts just as much as your butt being in the seat. I mean, there's all these things where it's like, that makes sense regardless of pandemic. So I do believe that there are so many opportunities that we've seized and that I think can be implemented long-term based on the experiences that we have.
It's that, why do we do things this way? It's because that's how we've always done them. Well, boom, as of March, that's not how we do them anymore. So now we have new ways to look at it. Yeah, interesting. So I'm particularly interested also, and I know when we talk about funding for schools, the one thing that always comes up is funding for special needs students. So how are special needs students being supported in this environment? Because it just may not be possible for them to sit in front of a screen and be effectively instructed, depending on what their learning challenge is. So how are special needs students being supported for this? And I know that I heard, and this is just me like parroting back kind of something I've heard something about small group instruction potential in the school, and I haven't heard much about what that looks like. So Patrick, I'm going to start with you on this one. So what is special education students, how are we supporting them?
I think that was our biggest concern last March when this all happened, is we were really worried about those who would be most dramatically impacted by the closure. It affected everyone. It's not to suggest that it didn't, but we were particularly concerned about our students with special needs and disabilities. And there are federal requirements around that. All of our students that qualify for special education are entitled to something called FAPE, which is a free and appropriate public education. And regardless of if you're closed or not, the rules have been very, very clear. You must provide FAPE. And so what we have been talking about is having to review our students' IEPs at the beginning of the school year and go through each one of those individual education plans, what an IEP is. And that really determines how we serve that student. Depending on the disability and the accommodations that are needed, it's perfectly possible that we could do things remotely. But there might be other students maybe that have profound physical needs that involve physical therapy and things like that. We can't provide that over a Zoom session. Right. So thankfully, the Department of Health has given us some wiggle room to bring in smaller groups of students with staff, again, if we're meeting the CDC guidelines, the LNI and Department of Health guidelines, that we can provide some of those in-person services. But each individual education plan is going to be looked at by an IEP team to determine what is it that they need to meet their needs so that they get FAPE. If it requires them to come in person and we can meet all of those requirements, then we're going to try and do that. If we can do it remotely, then we'll do that remotely. But that's the great thing about special education, is individualized. Each student is different, and you really have to work through that individual education plan.
Okay. Sean?
Well, it would be echoing so much of what Patrick just said. There's a good reason that what the plan these kids are on is called an individual education plan, is because we need to look at each one carefully and say, what does this student need? That's the nature of special education services. And so we're in the same situation of evaluating each student's plan and identifying what can be done remotely, what might we need to have the student on site for, and just making sure that we're working with the families to identify what are the services that are going to be most effective for that student. It's, my wife's a special education teacher, so we have these discussions all the time about how do we meet the needs of every student in this situation. And it's just a lot of studying how can we help each individual continue to learn and grow at high levels, and through and we're also looking at what online programs. There are some online resources out there that are really powerful and designed for students with a variety of disabilities that can help them to accelerate their learning. And so we're looking for what are the best supports remotely, of course, that relationship between the teacher and the student, and then when do we need to bring them on site to provide the level of service they're going to need to succeed in this environment.
Okay. Brian, anything in?
Yeah, I think our broken record this summer has been listen to parents. And in the special education realm, we could have two kids who need roughly the same services, and one family says, I really want that student to go to school, and we have the ability to do that. And the other family says, it's not safe for my student to go. Can you recreate that online for us? And we have to say yes to both of those. And so I'm just amazed at the level of creativity. We had a very unique challenge where our English language learner students typically are on one side of the town, and they're very much wanting online learning. And so making sure we have those supports in Spanish are really, really important. And we're sending people to those homes one at a time, one-on-one visits, trying to figure out if there are any students that we need to bring on site. But that's a population that we're serving very creatively in the online environment. Our biggest challenge with special education and across our district are families who simply there's no hope at getting an internet connection to their home. And so we've worked creatively to distribute our technology differently, and introducing the ability to bring kids in small groups onto our site where they can download from our network onto their Chromebook, take it home and work offline. They don't need the internet to work on the offline side of things. And then when they come back again, then they upload, and that's a much better sequence than doing packets of paper that's not a great or efficient manner of doing business this way. But the most encouraging thing is that really we've always said we're always about kids, all means all, those kinds of things. But we now are building systems for every kid. There's not a kid that we can say, nah, we don't have a solution for you. Sorry. We got to find solutions. And that's been the fun cognitive challenge of this whole thing, is really putting our beliefs to a test and finding those solutions. And as I said before, you put a good challenge in front of educators and they will figure it out.
So in so many ways, and I'll come to you in just a second, Deborah, education's becoming more customized for the students, right, for this. Deborah, how about special needs, special education students in North Thurston? How are they being supported?
I'm not going to repeat what my colleagues have already shared. We all operate under the same federal guidelines and state guidelines, so we're all going through that process of looking at, from an individual perspective, having those meetings, working with the family to identify how to deliver services. I would say those students who are most likely to be served on site, it would be because it requires on-site service, such as an occupational therapist working with a student. I would also say that we're not looking solely at students who qualify for special education services as students who will come on site. We have a number of classes that Learning how to weld is best using all of the equipment in our welding shops. Learning how to work on an automobile, maybe best with some on-site experiences. So we're thinking between now and November 13th, while we're operating 100% remote with services for students in groups of 5 or less, to be beyond those who are served in special education, but really what is the reason that we need to provide on site, with our first focus of doing absolutely the best job we possibly can providing for remote instruction, because we know that that is what is safest right now, is the remote instruction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have faced that same challenge here. Go ahead, Patrick.
Again, the idea that Brian shared up about parents, the one thing that we've heard about is we really need to work with our parents. What's happened right now, because we aren't on site, is parents, I believe, are more connected than they've ever been to their school district, right? So this would not have happened without the pandemic. So we used to have board meetings, and I would have board members come up to me and say, boy, I wish we could get more people to come to a board meeting. Well, physically, you have to go to a board meeting.
Right.
You used to. Now you just click on a Zoom link and you're at a board meeting. I kid you not, Deb, we've had 800 people at a board meeting. Wow. We've never had 800 people at a board meeting for that. We've had town hall meetings with our parents, with our special education parent leadership groups, where we've had hundreds of people show up and say, hey, talk to me about how my kid could be served. Like Brian was saying, I don't want to be in person. I want to be remote. Is there a way you can do that? And so because people are more connected than ever before, it's incredibly important as a school district that we be consistent, because they will hear that this is happening over here and this is happening over here, and why can't I get this here? That whole idea of individualization, we need to have our ears open and be very consistent and make sure that we can offer those things, because we've never been so connected as a community, not just in the Olympia School District, but I think across this entire Thurston County region. That's why I think you're hearing a lot of similarities, because we've all been talking and we're more connected than we ever have been before. Because
So how has this impacted, and this is not unusual though for most of our districts. We've had conversations over the years where the districts have all worked together to accomplish a thing, and you may have done it a little bit differently, but your outcomes, you're all looking for the same outcome and using, similar processes. So how has this impacted choices like the learning platform that's going to be used? You're not all using the same learning platform. You're using different learning platforms. How did you come to those decisions? And Sean, it's your turn to go first. So tell us about the learning platforms that are going to be used in Tumwater and why you chose those.
Sure. So our primary learning platform will be Google Classroom, and some of that is familiarity and simplicity. There's so many different learning platforms, and there's strengths and weaknesses to every one. And I've heard some great debates as we've discussed these things about what might make one better than another or more capable. But what we have is trying to find this balance of simplicity and yet functionality. And for us, Google Classroom was the one that stood out the most and was most familiar to many of our staff, and we felt like could provide a universal platform across the district. Now that said, we did hear from elementary teachers, some of them who said, hey, but we really in our building or in this area could do some creative things with the use of Seesaw. And so as a district, in the end, we decided we would, that we would give teachers also that opportunity to use Seesaw as an alternative to Google Classroom. And actually the two can work together. And so those are the two platforms our students will see most. Primarily across the district, you'll see Google Classroom, but where it makes more sense, Seesaw will be a functional learning management system. But so many of our decisions as we've gone through this planning process have been this back and forth between talking with our teachers about what they learned from this spring, gathering feedback through surveys with our parents, and then our administrators gathering all that information together, and also learning from our colleagues around the region. As you've heard, we're discussing with each other on a constant basis and reading, because this is happening not just in our region, it's happening nationwide. And I think every day I read new articles that tell me more about what's happening in other places, what they're learning, successes, failures, challenges, and that's helped us kind of settle to some systems that we really think will make us better this fall.
Okay. What platforms are you using in Yelm, Brian?
We prior to the shutdown, we were using Google Classroom in about 80 to 85% of our classes. And so we decided to stay with that. And we really adopted a philosophy that, because one of the things about education is that when you start saying, hey, there's tools out there, that conversation can get very wide very fast. And so we've tried to take a systemic approach that we wanted to stay consistent, and Google Classroom allowed us to do that. Our live video tool is Zoom, and our asynchronous tool is Screencastify. And we use Gmail and Google Drive and Google Docs as our way for our students to produce and submit work. And then when our teachers, their creative side kicks in, we've developed processes to say, if we're going to bring an additional tool, there's a systemic way to do it. And we want to evolve together rather than evolve by going apart, knowing that that'll confuse our families when we do. So we've already added a tool called Smart Music in one area. A lot of our CTE classrooms are looking into virtual ways to do some of the performances. And then just like Deb talked about, we will augment that with small groups eventually in our shops and in our labs. But trying to be very thoughtful and not forgetting that whatever change we make is a change for our families, and that's not easy.
Okay. Deb, what platforms are you using in North Thurston?
We're staying with the same that we used last spring. So it'll be Google Classroom at the elementary level and Canvas at middle and high school level. As Brian mentioned, we're using Screencastify, where teachers can create training videos that can be viewed by students at any time. And then a new tool that our teachers are learning to use is called Cami, and it's a PDF editor, which integrates with Google Classroom, and it will allow teachers to assign a task, a document, and the students can pull up a PDF, and then they can fill it out to turn it in for assessment.
Okay. And Patrick, what about Olympia?
In Olympia, we put together an academic fall contingency planning committee, had like over 160 people on it, students, parents, community members, teachers, and we had a long conversation about this. We really used the OSPI guidance for this. Remember, the whole purpose about the learning management system being consolidated came out of the OSPI guidance because we wanted a one-stop shop for our parents. Again, it was, if they're going to be home, we don't have that even playing field of being in the classroom, let's not make it difficult for them. So when we flipped overnight back in the spring, we were sending emails, we were using Google Classroom, we were using Schoology, we were using all these different types of things, and it was causing confusion. So our planning committee got together and we landed on one platform, K-12, and we're going to be using Schoology. Google Classroom was more predominant at the lower elementary grades, so we're going to be providing more training and support for our elementary teachers. But Schoology, like everybody said, was familiar in our district, and that familiarity is important for our families so they can continue to use that.
Okay, cool. Obviously, you know, the classroom is not the only thing people come to school for. They come to school for many other things. And how are things like extracurriculars being managed in this situation? Are they happening? Are things possible? You know, what's going on? Deb, we'll start with you.
All of us fall under WIA rules, and WIA decided pretty recently, later in the summer, to offer 4 seasons. And then based on the current COVID-19 transmission rates within Washington State and our community in particular, the fall season got bumped to what would be season 3 of the new 4 seasons. So we will not have students participating in sports this fall. We did run summer practices, and we followed all the CDC guidelines and to make sure that our student athletes were safe in their participation. Season 2 will be the first season for us this year, And then with regard to all of our clubs and other activities, we expect those to be happening during that time that we've designated in the secondary school schedule.
Okay.
We also have quite a few elementary clubs. So again, that will either get scheduled in during their independent learning time, they'll get scheduled in, or maybe connected to their lunch period. Just like you would during a normal time if you were at school, our secondary students having some of the club meetings at that time. I think what will be interesting to see is many of the clubs, their end of year competitions were canceled last year, but coming a year later, it'll be interesting to see how many of those student organizations are able to transition to a type of virtual competition. If in fact we won't be able to have those larger group gatherings yet by springtime when a lot of students will be competing. So I think there's a little bit of wait and see with each of those activities that requires more in person.
Okay. I know we can go around, and I don't want people just to keep repeating, but gentlemen, do any of you have anything to add to that?
I wouldn't, we're exactly what Deb said. The only thing I would say is that, and it seems obvious, but when school closed, things became really apparent that we always kind of knew, but we didn't really know how much. And sports and activities is one of those. I mean, it is a huge deal. And when you go to our commencement ceremonies and look what kids write in their yearbooks and in their quotes and whatnot, they don't say, I remember when I met Standard on the Smarter Balance Assessment, right? They talk about going to the quarterfinals on their volleyball team,
Right.
or being in the play and having to step in because the lead was sick. You know, all of those things. It's such a huge part of their experience. And in many ways, missing out on that is just as important to our students and their families as the academic pieces that they're missing. So we hear that. We'll work with the WIA and everybody else to try and get those things back in place. But I'm just acknowledging the fact that that's a massive hole that is in kids and families' lives right now that they want filled.
Yeah.
And for clubs and activities, I think there are so many opportunities here, though, to really get creative. This spring, I saw the Olympia Symphony figure out how to perform a symphony from their own homes. And so if they can figure that out, and I imagine the complexity of that act, I think here's an opportunity to say to our club advisors and to our students, how can we get creative about how to continue to have opportunities to connect? Because our kids need that. If when they're all stuck at home and they don't get to see their friends like they normally do, this is our chance to give them something beyond the day that the things that are such an integral part of that school experience. And so it's just going to take some really creative thinking and trying to find ways to improvise until we're able to be back together.
Our board's been really clear with me and the community that if we can prove that we can do something safely and it provides kids some measure of connectivity back to the school system, we want to try to get to a yes if we can. Never sacrificing safety, and we know how viciously this virus can spread. So in that first season that Deb was talking about, there are two considered low-risk sports of cross country and golf. And we're going to see what we can do. We're not making a unilateral decision yet. The problem is that our competition schools are in other counties, and they may be not available for competition. Yeah. So what that looks like can be very different. We may be designing it, on a very short order, but I've been really impressed. Like Sean said, I've been really impressed with how our clubs and organizations have found other ways to get connected and to get involved. I'm really excited about some of the activities that we're seeing being developed virtually at our elementary schools, where kids, they can see it happen at school and do it at home. And there's some neat things there. So,
good. So I'm sorry.
Deb, if you don't mind, I would just also say, there is an opportunity, though all of us are talking about fall sports not having a competition at this point or push back to winter. There's still the opportunity for potentially having practices and kids coming together later on. And we're all going to continue to stay in communication with the health officer, because if it's safe to do so, as Brian said, we've got to find ways to get kids to participate in there. And practices sometimes can be done in a way that involve less contact and more social distancing than, of course,
Right.
what a competition can for so many sports. And so that's our hope that we'll get that opportunity.
Well, and some of what I've heard from young people in my life is it's not so much about the activity so much as it is just being able to spend time with their friends. You know,
Right.
to be within 6 feet of someone their age to have a conversation because they've been talking to adults for the last 5 months and they just want to be with their peers and have that opportunity. So I completely get that. So we talked a little bit earlier about challenges, technology challenges. And so what resources are there for parents who have technology challenges in their home? I know most all of you have made some kind of device available, a Chromebook or an iPad or something like that, but connectivity is an issue. So what resources do you have in your districts to help parents who may need technology support? Patrick, I think it's your turn.
In terms of connectivity, we have a couple options. Like you mentioned, Deb, we're very fortunate in the Olympia School District and across our region to have such support from our community around technology levies, devices, Chromebooks. We just are blessed with technology, and it's a very small issue for us in general. I mean, everybody has what they need in terms of device. In terms of connectivity, there's two things we do. We do hotspots, which is an individual little hotspot that they can use if they don't have internet access in their home. We've handed out hundreds of those to students and families and staff that live in really remote places. The other thing we have is through internet providers like Comcast. There's some really unique programs that provide, if not free, really, really low cost options for families. And our schools foundation is helping to fund that, working with our principals to identify families that might need help in that regard.
Good. Brian and Yelm?
Very similar. We've our school, we've got some remote schools. So one of the things that we've done is we've boosted our wireless internet signal in our so it's reaching our parking lots.
Oh, right.
So that when families need to, they can pull into the parking lot and log in, download their learning materials and such. We've also there are just some areas within our district that we can't resolve the connectivity problem. There's just not internet there. There's no infrastructure. And so we will be bringing those students on site, providing transportation and food service, and systematizing how we serve those kids throughout the day. And then, lastly, we've always had a one-to-one model, but we didn't always send those home. And now we're sending those devices home with kids. I think the other districts have done that more than we have. But really, and in doing so, we realized that we have not trained our parents how to be good internet support technology people. And so we've created an incredibly robust parent resource center on our website that parents, if they have a question and it's after hours, they can pop on our website and put in their question, and hopefully they'll get an answer. And one of the real creative things we've done with technology as well is knowing that our classified employees will take on different roles at times now, is we've created a help desk person at every school, which was not there before, so that if we can't get it fixed, there's a phone number to call, and we'll work through the problem one-to-one with a staff member from your home school. So we didn't have all those people. We're training them very rapidly right now, and we're excited to bring that to our families.
Okay. Deb?
I think I don't want to repeat everything that's already been said. We're one-to-one with Chromebooks, providing access to the internet through internet service providers. There are discounts that we are making sure our families know about, as well as hotspots. And then, just like Brian mentioned, we have created, Chromebook help support pages on our website, as well as numbers to call. This fall, we are providing more direct service at each location because we are open to the public, and that was different than last spring when we were completely shut down. So at each school site, if someone needs to go in to receive, exchange a Chromebook to get a different Chromebook, they can do that at their local school. That would be one difference for this year.
John?
very similar. All of our students have Chromebooks in a one-to-one. We're using Wi-Fi hotspots. Much like Brian, Tumwater School District spans out into some rural areas that just don't have connectivity. And so we're having to look at our families that live in those areas that aren't served by broadband, that are outside of cellular service, and in those cases come up with creative solutions. And we've done some of that work to extend Wi-Fi into parking lots. We'll be bringing students on campus for it. We're learning how our Chromebooks are generally designed to work when you're connected online, but our IT department has said, well, we can set them up so that they will work when you're not online. And then as students can download some of those videos, we're committed to making sure students have access to the resources. But getting some of our kids on campus in small groups is going to be critical, because some of them just simply can't access that at home, and we need to have a way for them to be able to be a part of their class and a part of the learning.
Yeah, I know that Chromebook challenge, because more than once I've been on a plane and have forgotten to download to an offline platform, and I've had a 3-hour flight and couldn't get to the document that I wanted to work on because I'd forgotten to do that. Did I miss anybody on that question, Brian?
Can I jump in and
Yeah.
add one more comment? I think that it's as hard as it is to answer these questions right now, this is the easy part of the conversation. And the harder part is what happens next? What if families are experiencing an outage? What if?
Yeah, well, yesterday Zoom was out on a huge portion of the country, so
And,
yeah.
you know, we had 400 folks on a Zoom, and Zoom went down the other day. That was fun. But it's having the systems so that when we do go down, we have the structures in place to fix it that day. And that takes communication and connectivity with parents. And I sound like a broken record, I know that, but we just can't wait for them to come back to school. We have to be able to reach out and be in contact with them day after day after day and say, how's it going? What did we miss this week? What can we be better servants of you and your kids? And that's the hard work.
Right. Is food service going to continue through, like you had the summer feeding program, the summer meal program?
Food
What about
service
that?
will be different. Food service will be different this fall because last spring we were operating under emergency guidance, emergency rules, so we could serve meals to anyone. And this fall it will reopen. Our meal service will be similar to a normal school year, where there will be a point of sale, and every child that's served will have to go through a checkout process. And if they qualify for a free meal, they'll be served that meal free of charge, but we'll have to account for every meal. One difference that we're providing this year is we're going to provide families the option of picking up 5 meals at one time. And so we have some service times in the evening as well as on Saturdays. But it will operate differently than it did last spring, and it will be different than the summer meals program.
Okay. Anybody else want to?
Yeah, we were real disappointed as a group. We're very disappointed as a group when the waiver to offer that meal to anyone was taken away. And we know we'll be providing more meals than just our free and reduced lunch population and the students that we'll sell lunch to. But great creativity. Deb said it, evening, weekends, multiple days worth, those will all be in place.
Okay. Well, we're coming up to the end of this program. It's been a full hour. I have about a minute left. Is there anything else anybody wants to add? I know there's probably a ton more we could talk about, but.
Well,
One thing, if I could add something, one thing that we've heard from the community is really around childcare and
Right.
support of families, working families. And I would say if there's something our community can do, it's reach out to your neighbors, see how you can help partner within your neighborhood, within your community, and work together to support each other with your young children in this new learning environment.
Okay. Anybody else, gentlemen?
well, Deb used to always give us an opportunity to celebrate something.
Right.
And so we had a board meeting this past Monday night, and one of our teachers, Carol McKay at Capitol High School, received the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science. Only one teacher in the state gets that each year. And so we're incredibly proud of her, and she's just symbolic and representative of all the strong teachers that we have in Olympia and across this region. So
Great.
we're excited. I mean, everything's been tough, but school's getting ready to start. If there's nothing that we don't love more, it's the first day of school. And I know it's not the way we want it to be, but I'm actually excited in a happy way that we're going to have students with teachers, not maybe the way we'd want it, learning very soon. And for that, I'm very grateful.
Good. Anybody else? Quick.
Yeah, one of the great silver linings, if there was one in the pandemic, is that school construction was allowed to continue. And so we have 7 construction projects going on right now. Our middle school is about 9 months from being completed, and then we'll start on rebuilding or replacing an elementary school. But we did 5 schools safety projects, and we did a transportation upgrade project. So there's been a lot going on. There wasn't much
easier
of a summer
to do when there's nobody there. So yeah. So anybody else?
Likewise, we've had the chance to open Tumwater Learning Center this summer, which will serve Cascadia High School, again, those construction projects being able to be completed is so important. And I think we're all seeing opportunities and chances to get better from this. And so we've opened up Tumwater Virtual Academy, which is a new school in our district that'll serve students with a whole different type of online curriculum for some families that are looking for more of a homeschool support program. So we know that's something that will exist beyond this. And Patrick said it many times, there's an opportunity here for us to just keep getting better from it. And I think that's the exciting part of going into this school year. Our community is going to see us learning throughout. And I think I'm just appreciate having this group of colleagues to learn from. So.
Okay. Last word, Deb.
Well, one thing that I think we're starting the fall reflecting on what happened last spring. And one thing that I heard from our teachers, some students not only survived but thrived in a different environment. Students who sometimes were quieter in the regular classroom were more, they participated more in a remote learning environment. So I want us to remember that remote learning is different, and there are a lot of students that will excel in this environment. And, our goal is to provide a quality experience for all of our students. And I know we're very committed to accomplishing that goal.
Okay. Well, thank you all for taking time for this special preschool starting episode of the Superintendent's Roundtable. Normally, I don't see you until after school starts. And I do appreciate that you've taken time to share this information. It's very important. Certainly a challenging time for all of us, but it feels like everybody has risen to meet the challenge. So congratulations on all the hard work and accomplishments over the summer, and best wishes for a really stupendous starting to the new school year. Thank you all for joining us too. Remember, if you're the parent of a preschool child, read with your child 20 minutes a day. It's one of the best things you can do to get them ready for education. And I don't have to tell you to get involved with your kids' education, because since March, you've been more involved in ways than you probably ever imagined. But remember that you're not in this alone. There are people who can help you to support your students. So if you have questions or concerns, email their teacher, contact the principal, reach out to the district. There are resources available for parents to make you successful in helping your student to be successful in this new academic environment. We'll see you again soon on the Superintendent's Roundtable. And remember, stay safe, wash your hands, be kind, and please wear a mask. Thank you.